live.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thank you very much for joining us for this latest session for the Open Inclusive Access to Research meeting. My name's Fiona Murphy, and I'm very pleased today to be facilitating a conversation between two very interesting people with very unique perspectives, I think, on these sorts of questions that we've been asking ourselves this week. So first of all, I've got Vincent Larivière, who is a Professor of Information Science and Associate Vice President in Planning and Communications at the Université de Montréal. Among other roles, he's also Scientific Director of the Erudite Journal platform and Associate Scientific Director of the Observatoire des Sciences et des Technologies, that's OST. In short, Vincent is a social scientist studying how researchers disseminate knowledge and the rewards associated with it. And then on my other side, we've got Ricardo Dal Farra, who is Professor at the Music Department of Concordia University, Canada, and the founder and director of the Electronic Arts Experimentation and Research Center of the National University of Tres de Febrero, Argentina. He's a composer, he is a new media artist, an educator, a historian, and a curator. And in short, he's used to diving between the spaces where art intersects with science and emerging technologies. So we're going to talk today about labour and reward in science with an open research perspective. And hopefully it'll be kind of lively, quite informal, but I will kick it off. I'm going to ask you both, perhaps Vincent first. What do you think? What would you say is science labour, the labour of science, and who do we think actually performs it?
Well, thanks for the invitation and thanks for the opportunity. I'm very pleased to having such a big group of people to discuss those things. So of course, the labour of science in a way includes all of the different tasks that are being done by researchers throughout all fields to advance science. So that includes doing manipulation, doing conceptual work, writing papers. So it's kind of a big array of different actions that are actually made to actually progress science. There's amazing descriptions of this work that you can read in Bruno Latour's work, Laboratory Life, where it basically explains in a very thick description manner how researchers basically create knowledge. What I think is an important question to ask ourselves is, despite this diversity of different actions that are being made, what are the acts that we actually give more reward to? So there's an area of things that are being done, but there's some that we collectively consider to be more important than others. And is that justified? And these are the things that I guess we should be discussing and debating today, because again, science is a very competitive activity, and the reward that we give to people give actually those people more importance in the research system, give their field also more importance in the research system. So these are the things that I think, yeah, we should, I guess, debate, and I look forward to hearing the more artistic perspective on that.
Okay.
Yeah, Ricardo, what would you say?
Well, as Vincent was saying, I don't know if it's an artistic perspective, but I will. Don't expect me to follow all the rules, okay? Because I'm here for that, probably. Yes, so I'm going to break a few rules here and there. So just to start and following what Vincent was saying, I was checking the title of this conversation, and it says in English, labor and reward in science, but it doesn't say exactly the same in Spanish, sorry. It says, Trabajo y premios en la investigación, meaning, yes, labor and rewards if you want, but in research. And then I have a point. Then you are leaving me the space to say something about that, because in one case, why in English is saying science and in Spanish is saying investigación, is saying research. So before to talk maybe into the details of labor and reward, I would say, of course, this symposium is mainly about science, and so we could say why I'm here. but we have research in arts too. So depending on the perspective, I mean, this is maybe something newer in some spaces than others, but just to start, I think that to come back on this difference between only talking about science and talking about research in general, that could be a really interesting point, because this could take us to other places. And in terms of labor and reward, it's interesting, and we could, yes, talk much more than an hour probably, but the issue is that I think it is an important thing when you were born in a different place and you finally work in a different one. Like I was born in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, and I'm living in Montreal, Canada. And you know, the way you see your labor in terms of research probably is quite different in different places, I would say, because mainly here we are talking about Latin America, Canada, and in general too. So I would say different places of Latin America has a different perspective of that, a different way of proceeding, and what we can call, let me quote, reward. Oh, that's a very complex issue that I will maybe leave it for after. So let's what it means reward. Okay, so we'll come back on this.
So I'm getting the sense then, yes, there's a lot of terms which mean a lot, different things depending on who's saying it, what language you're speaking in, and where you are and where you've moved to. So if you like, then if you like, people perhaps think they understand. Talking about when they're talking about I do science and I get rewarded. But actually, we all have fixed ideas, all have ideas what we think it is, which don't necessarily align exactly with what other people would think. I mean, do you think that means that we should be more consciously flexible, if you like, about how we assess and how we define research activities than has been the case? Someone want to go first on that?
I can jump in on that. Of course, okay. The question of reward links us to the idea that science is a meritocracy in some way, that you've got researchers who are discovering stuff and they're being rewarded for what they do. Decades of research in sociology of science have seen that there's plenty of biases in what is being rewarded. There's a phenomenon that is well known, which is called the Matthew effect in science. So some of you may know what this is, but basically it's a phenomenon by which people who are already well recognized will be even more recognized if there's a new discovery that's being done. So let's say that I discover something simultaneously with Albert Einstein. Of course, we understand that this is impossible, but let's say that it happened in a parallel world. Then Einstein would get the credit because he already has more credit. So people would say, oh, he discovered that rather than Vincent discovered it. So this is visible on so many levels. You have one discovery from Harvard University. You can be sure that in the newspaper, it's going to be a paper by Harvard University, and it's going to be highlighted because it gives more credit. So the reward that they get is also something that gives more credibility to things. In parallel with that, if there's a discovery made at the University of Montreal or at some other university, it would be said a university in Canada or a university somewhere. So these are all things that are not done necessarily consciously, but that are subliminally in people's mind, not only researcher, but everyone's mind, where you're going to give more credit to things that are already more prestigious. So the issue of reward, we need to remember that it's a social construct. It's something that we collectively decided to give more importance to. And this is true at many levels, but one that I think is crucial to discuss is scholarly journals. So we collectively decided that a journal like Science, a journal like Nature, is more prestigious. Of course, there's a history to that, because in the past, they have managed to publish more important papers. But nowadays, the reward that the journal Science will give to my paper is huge. So I will send my best paper at Science in the hope that it gives me the biggest scientific capital. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because in reality, the journal is only as prestigious as what we collectively decide to assign to that journal in terms of prestige. So there's work and there's rewards. There's a link between the two, but the link is not as strong as many people believe, or as some people would like us to believe. That relationship between work and reward is very importantly a social construct that we need to understand. Now, just one last point, echoing what Ricardo just said about art versus science. I agree that there's a spectrum. There's rewards in arts is part of academia in many ways, but also a kind of a separate beast in the university ecosystem. I'm sure, Ricardo, when you talk to your deans and vice presidents, they don't always understand what you do, and they don't know how to assess it. So this is something that I think should be an interesting contrast to discuss. We know that in most of the sciences, you do lab work, that's the work, and then there's a paper published, and that's the reward. I think that in arts, there's a different trajectory, which is also probably a social construction in some way, but it would be interesting to explore how much of a different construction it is.
Ricardo.
Yes, well, a lot of interesting things, Vincent. Well, you talk about so many things about meritocracy, credibility, but especially I will put my anchor in social construct, because we are on the same boat at the end, right? So yes, maybe a different methodology, but in some way, I mean, art is based on that social construct. I mean, what is about culture, history, etc. I mean, that's exactly the social construct that is holding the arts. Why we do art? Why I'm usually, I'm teaching electroacoustic music, so sometimes I'm saying, if you didn't hear electroacoustic music before, I'm asking my student, why are we doing something like and things like that? I mean, it's not broken, Fiona, sorry, I was making some noises. It's just the kind of music we do, but where this is coming from, this was not born suddenly, one day. There is a history, there's a culture, there is a social construct. So that's really interesting. And I mean, you said also something, I'm going to make public something I'm usually saying in a few spaces that I think is important. When you was mentioning, okay, when you talk to, to maybe someone in the administration that is linked to how you assess certain kind of things. And I'm very concerned many times, because it happens in science and in music and in the arts in general, etc., how we assess. Yes, this, because based on the assessment is going to be the reward. And then let's put the rewards aside for a while. But I'm saying sometimes the problem is that we assess by kilogram, So I hope you can understand what I mean. So that's a big problem, because it doesn't matter what you write. The problem is how many pages are you publishing here or there. Yes, of course, if you publish here or there, this is based on what you were saying also about different journals, if peer review, etc. But not everything is so transparent in life as we would like to. So you were saying, Vincent, about meritocracy. Yes, that will be what we want. But what, for example, I was listening to part of a presentation where with alternative ways of assessing assessing our production. What it happens in the arts? What happens in the arts? I mean, we publish, but not everyone is publishing, because maybe some people are more closer to the academia, other people are not interested. I hear in some colleagues from different universities saying, oh, in these universities, we are artists, we don't publish. I mean, you can say whatever you want, but I mean, if you're in academia, it's a little bit strange that you don't publish. You never talk or explain what you're producing. At the same time, is the publication the only way you have to do the assessment? Is that the only way to proceed, or do we have other ways? So, for example, just to to finalize this part. I mean, I'm in a music department. So if someone is doing, what is research there? Who is considering, I mean, because different people can have different perspective about what research is. And then if you're, for example, a composer or theoretician is something, what if you're an interpreter, for example, if you're performing, what is research in that way? Okay, so, well, let's go for the next.
No, but that's really interesting. If I want to jump on what you said about the different types of productions that people in your department would have. So like in my department, people write articles, and if they don't write that article, it's going to be a book or a book chapter. So it's all relatively similar. In your department, there's a much higher diversity of work that can be done. So you said you can have composers, interpreters, you have musicologists who are going to be writing about the work in the context. And so the evaluation that is made is probably very difficult because of the diversity. And I want to make a small parenthesis here, which is that in a bibliometric world, okay, in a world where we evaluate everyone with their papers, we lose this diversity. We've been losing it in the social sciences, where I'm from, for a while. Historically, we would write book and book chapters. We would write in French and in English. What we're seeing in this world is that we are less and less writing books, less book chapters, more articles, because this is what is being measured. We're writing less in French, more in English. So we are losing this diversity because of the reward. The work remains the same, but because there's more reward, we are changing the way we are disseminating it. But I'm actually wrong by saying that it doesn't change the work, because it actually does. Because you don't work the same manner for a book than you do for an article. And you also don't work on the same topic if you want to publish in English than if you want to publish in French. And I see all of my South American friends and colleagues here who probably feel the same, where basically in this English paper-centric world, we are being incentivized not to work on our own nations, but to work on so-called international problems, which are US and UK centric. So if my dean comes to me and say, you should publish in English, then I'm going to start to work on things related to Quebec, and I'm going to work on US and British things. So the reward in the end is not neutral, because it fuels in the research activity. I'm closing this parenthesis. We can go back to that. But what I find fascinating in your field, Ricardo, is the diversity of all of those things, which you need not to lose, because you need to be able to have all of these people in your department that can make the field much more rich than if everyone was a composer or everyone was a musicologist, because only musicologists write papers, and this is what we measure in the end, you know.
Yeah, I think there were several things that, of course, you are originally Francophone, I imagine. Yes, yeah. So of course, and Quebec has a lot of situations regarding the languages and the culture. I mean, and then can you imagine? But Canada is in the north, clearly. Okay, still, I hope you understand what I mean. So, but imagine when you publish in Spanish. Yes, okay. When you publish in Spanish, maybe just, yes, we have today the internet, but still, if you want to circulate what you're publishing in Latin America and Spain, etc., it's not that easy. Still, with internet, of course, we can do it all electronically, but if you don't want to do it electronically, everything changed. But let me go to something that is linked to what you were saying about publishing in English, French, or another language. Also, when you publish, I mean, I used to say, now I'm spending most of my time in the north, even if I travel, or I was traveling a lot before the pandemic. But I used to say, when I was living in Buenos Aires, my concept was, okay, let's publish in the north, because it's like a triangle, you know? If I want someone living 2 blocks from my house in Buenos Aires to read what I'm doing, don't publish in Buenos Aires, publish it, yes, as you said, in the US or in the UK, etc., because that's the way it's going to reach that people. It's terrible, and it doesn't happen in other places, but that's part of what it happens to many of us here probably in this symposium. Of course, internet changed a lot of things, but it's not that everything changed, because still many people are, for example, if you publish something online, it doesn't have the same value that if you put it printed on paper for many institutions. So then you start to go to this notion of labor and reward, because reward, and if we go further, reward, it exists, or it has some kind of sense in certain places. If we make a difference between what reward is, maybe in Quebec, or if we think in Brazil or Colombia or Argentina, Peru, the situations are different. And for some people, the reward is only the merit that you reach what you wanted to reach with your research. And that's it. In other places, it means a difference in salary, yes, in difference in prestige, etc. So it is really different in many places. It's not the same at all.
No, it's a good point. And actually many universities and government have created, I mean, reward used to be a pure social construct that was not tangible, but there's many places in the world that have created pure formulas of reward. And of course, the extreme example is the Chinese case, where before the pandemic, cash bonuses were directly associated to impact factors of journals. So basically, if you were publishing in Science or Nature in some university, you would get around $150,000 US dollars for that publication. So that changes everything. So you have the symbolic reward of the prestige, but there's also strong monetary reward that are directly associated. And it's just not just a concept or something that you will be able to negotiate. No, it's a formula. The formula for reward is totally tied with the publication venue. So that's one extreme case in China, but there's many, even Nordic countries, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, etc., that we see as examples are having the same thing. So actually, I would propose, and I'm seeing a couple of comments in the chat that point in this direction. The problem that we have right now is that the reward are no longer based on the tasks or on the labor. It's based on the dissemination. The dissemination, and therefore the journal, has become the key element of the reward. And so everyone understands here that if the publication becomes the reward, or the publication is directly linked with the reward, then we are reinforcing for-profit corporate publishers that come from the north and that determine the research agenda. And these publishers, in addition to that, created their own evaluation systems. And therefore, we are stuck in their system, and we're stuck. The science that has value is the science that they control in their system. And this is bad on, I think, every level that's possible.
Very, very interesting, Vincent, because yes, I think you reach a very important point about the reward in terms of publishing. Let me go back again about quantity and quality. I don't know that, of course, quality is much more difficult to assess, and that's the idea of the peer review, etc. But I'm on the editorial board of several journals. And I always thought, because I'm coming from Argentina, and because of my history and where I'm coming from and the culture, at least years ago, I thought, okay, if I had the possibility to help someone to publish something, basically I always thought and I still think is the idea of publish something that is interesting, also a diversity, because maybe there are people that are going to be less published, even if they have great ideas, but it's much more difficult because of the language, because you were born here or there, because you are living here or there, etc., etc. So these kind of things are really important. And let me give you an example, because of this trajectory, if you want, where I'm coming from. For me, was this idea of the reward is just to publish. That's it, to make known what you were working for so long. And maybe it's too naive to think like that, but that was my idea. And then sometimes, depending who I'm talking to, where is this person working, in which country, maybe in some countries, for example, in some countries of Latin America, if you ask someone, I'm directing a center and we publish a lot of things online. Okay, so we received something from Spain this morning that is very important. And I'm very happy because we can help to disseminate this information. But if I'm asking, for example, a colleague from certain countries in Latin America, do you want to publish that work? It's great. I would love to help with the dissemination. And this person maybe is going to ask me, okay, but where are you going to publish it? And which is are you indexed here or there or there? Well, I never care about that. I said, yes, I never ask even, I don't even know, I don't care. But why? Of course, as we know in certain places, that means specific reward, a very specific reward, far beyond the meritocracy you started to talk before. So yes, maybe this is a little bit naive, but the idea of having a research and achieving something and then having the reward of just doing it and make it known, well, it doesn't work the same in all places. You were giving some examples, but it's not only in the north that it works in some way. For example, if I publish more or less in certain universities in Canada or in certain faculties, it doesn't change anything. I mean, in the evaluation, it doesn't change. Yes, they are going to tell me, oh, good. Yes, so good what you did, but that's it. In other places, the people is asking you exactly what you're going to do, how many pages, where, everything, because it means as a step in their career, academic career, or even an increase in payment, even if it's small. So it's very crucial in many cases. So it's very complex to have a equal level of evaluation of what this means.
Yeah, which brings us to the role of nations in creating that. So I mean, you are right, Ricardo. In Canada, I must say that I think we are quite fortunate. Education, so that everyone knows, education is a provincial competency, not a federal competency, which means that it's the provinces here, like Quebec, like Ontario, that decide how they manage their university and how they fund them. And the basic funding for universities here is purely based on teaching. So it's the number of students that you have, in what level and in what program. And of course, a PhD gives more money than an undergrad, and medicine costs more than sociology. That's the way it works. So it means that you do research and you get external funding, but it's not from the same pocket as the basic state funding. So there's no incentive. The university doesn't push its faculty to publish more because it gives them more points in a ranking system like they have in Australia and other places in the world. So we're actually quite fortunate. So countries can do something to change the culture. And what we're seeing now is indeed some countries that have, let's say, more extreme policies are orienting the researchers in some way. And what's striking, I want to bring us to the changes in the pandemic, because the pandemic has changed a couple of things in the entire reward system. And the Chinese case is fascinating because China was extreme. And early in the pandemic, they realized that they had created the social conditions so that the researchers would do bad science, or at least that they would do bad dissemination. So early in the pandemic, late 2000, well, before the pandemic actually, when there were the first couple of cases in Wuhan, the Chinese Academy of Sciences sent a couple of researchers to Wuhan to understand what was happening with this virus. The researchers stayed there a couple of days and then went back to Beijing and wrote a paper in English to publish it in the New England Journal of Medicine. And of course, the Chinese authorities were very angry because the results were not available to the Chinese community. They were disseminated internationally. And of course, what the Chinese researchers had done was simply to follow the rules of the incentives, let's say, of the government, which is to publish in English because that's more prestigious. And so the Chinese authority said, that's enough. We need to have more papers in Chinese because we are the forefront of this thing. There needs to be about 25 to 30% of the funded papers that are published in Chinese for the Chinese society so that medical doctors, etc., are actually able to understand what's happening. And they also realized that cash per publications were actually a bad incentive. So they understood early in the pandemic that they had created the social conditions for researchers to do bad science. So in science policy, you're trying to understand science in a way that it leads to better science, that it leads to more social impacts, etc. And in many places in the world, and I think China is an extreme example, we created structural conditions for us to misbehave, for us to not do science for the right things, for us to actually not do the best science that we could. And this is what I think states need to work on. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I think the pandemic is giving us an opportunity to change the reward structure of science, because in the end, it's with incentives that you change behavior. Researchers, and I'll give a last example on that. Researchers used to publish in the languages that they want. If we take again the case of Einstein, Einstein almost exclusively wrote in German early in his career, then wrote a couple of papers in French because Marie Curie was not too far and there was a big French community. And it took the 20s and mostly the 1930s for him to start publishing in English. When Hitler comes to power in 1933, he goes to the US in Princeton, and then he writes in English. And at the end of his career, all of his papers are in English. But he basically reacted to the incentives of his era. But we can move back to a multilingual dissemination system. It's just a matter of creating the national incentives. And also right now, I believe that we have the tools to help with automated translation, as we are having, I mean, it's not automated translation, but we're able with Zoom to have better tools to have international debates which are multilingual. And so, yeah, it's just a matter of political willpower.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Thanks. I think that I was writing here some notes before we started. And one of the things I wrote here, let me see, because it's in Spanish. Yes, I was asking myself about when the state must intervene in making, not just because I'm moving out a little bit from just publishing, but about the core issue of the conference about open data, open science. I mean, when the state must intervene, because here finally we are talking about politics, economy, power, priorities. Who fixed the priorities? You were saying something very specific, because in Quebec, where we both work, the priorities are focusing in how many students you have, et cetera, et cetera. Then the incentives to do research, yes, you need to go, and yes, there are fantastic agencies like at the federal level, provincial level, et cetera, that can help funding your research or not, depending of many other things that we can talk after. But I mean, yes, finally, you know that also if you choose certain issues, or if you use certain words, or if you put a little bit of this and that, you have more probabilities that you will be funded because of certain policies, certain priorities. But who is fixing that? It's not the scientific community. I understand it's more the political world who is giving you, okay, we are going to prioritize this or this or this or that. It looks okay in some ways, because okay, it is like the political world that is looking for us and what we need to pursue, what we need to, where the government needs to put money so we can have a better life as a society. But things are much more complex than that.
Yeah, I would let's say complement your point a bit about how at least things are made here. Basically, the research councils in Canada and in Quebec set up general, let's say there's a division of the money. So if you take the research councils at the federal level, social sciences has a tiny funding compared with medical sciences and natural sciences. And basically, if you take Canada as overall, there's almost one professor out of two who is in the social sciences. So almost half of professors are in the social sciences, but only about 20% of the funding goes to those fields. So there's indeed a lot of inequalities. But I would say that within those councils and within the committees, in the end, it's always researchers and peers who decide who get funding. And unfortunately, researchers are not immune to buzzwords and fashions and trends, etc. And so, yeah, there's topics like a couple of years ago, if you were putting the word artificial intelligence in your grant, it was a done deal. You would be funded. So I don't know if you made AI electroacoustic music, but I wish you had, because you would be funded because it was sexy, you know? So there's all of these fads. I think it's a normal feature of science. Yeah, smart cities, Daniel is right. Yeah, there's all of those things which are both related to a social demand. I mean, AI is important. Smart cities is something important, but we need to be careful. I mean, right now, if you write COVID-19, you're going to be funded. So the COVID-19 of anything, it's going to be part, because indeed it's a real problem. But there's of course debates, and probably they are happening also throughout the world, about COVIDization of research. So seeing everything through the lens of COVID, which of course we all agree is important, but we need to have people who still do electroacoustic music in a pure manner. I don't want you, Ricardo, to do COVID-19 influence electroacoustics, you know? So, but and last point I'll say on COVID, because I think it's important. Last year in 2020, there has been more paper published than ever in the history of humanity. So we were actually in a pandemic, but we managed collectively, the scientific community managed to publish more than 1 million more than in 2019. So in 2019, collectively, there was about 5 million papers published. And in 2020, we collectively published more than 6 million papers. So an increase of 1 million in a year where there were, so there was a crazy amount of research being done. Now the question is, and this is of course related, I think, to both the reward and the labor, were all of these papers good? And of course the answer is no. But we are in an ecosystem, as you were saying, Ricardo, where quantity is seen, unfortunately, as more important than quality. Everyone is publishing more. You're looking at the CV of an assistant professor. They have way longer CVs than many full professors that have been there for 30 years. There's a crazy inflation. And this is not, I think, because younger faculty are more clever than older faculty when they were young. It's just the pressure to publish, which are, again, the systemic effect of the rewards that we are seeing at the end.
Yes, very, very interesting. I mean, just let me tell you that in electroacoustic music, or in general in music, we use anything you can imagine, and from biology, artificial intelligence, or just name it. So, so that's one thing. But coming back to this quantity versus quality, I have a couple of examples that I find interesting. For example, an extraordinary composer and researcher, that he in fact discovered and applied certain issues related to the creation of music and how to synthesize music. He was working at Stanford University. If you check how many papers he published, and if you think that many of his papers are just variations or deepening a little bit of the original ideas, and he didn't compose many works, just a few. I mean, less than 5 that are really well known. But the quality of his research, the quality of his works, because he's showing also what he was doing in a theoretical and applied research, but the quality of what he was doing definitely changed the world of music since the 80s. And not only about experimental, strange, electroacoustic things. No. The world of music changed because he was developing a certain way of synthesizing sounds. And this was finally applied by a company, a Japanese company. He created synthesizer. And this was a world revolution. There was a before and after in how to make music. But how many real new ideas he brought? Maybe 3? Well, that's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot. But how many papers you need to publish during your life? So you justify, yes, you justify in some way that work that you were creating were really astounding, was really changing the world. Sometimes it's not enough. If you publish this in the 70s and you are just publishing like updates, well, maybe it's not enough. Maybe it's not enough. You need to show that you are producing, what it means producing. So it is a controversy between what the people see about the academics from outside the university and what is the real life inside the university. And you were using a word before, I think was competitive, to be competitive, because it looked like, scientists are all nice people, that they don't compete between each others. And I mean, we're human beings. There are all kind of good, bad, and everything in between. So life is much more complex than we think. And maybe because scientists are, as you said, you need to publish, and then you have a certain way of measuring certain things. In the arts world, it's a little bit more complex in some sense, and a little bit more difficult if you want to make a real assessment. Yes, because what are you going to assess? And then it becomes very complex because you have, like in Canada, we have the Canada Council for the Arts, or the Quebec Conseil des Arts et des Lettres, etc., etc. So you have a lot of things that are based on peer review, but still, it's not always that simple, the evaluation. Yeah.
And not only that, we know that peer review is not perfect either. So we are, again, in a system where there is it's very difficult to assess the intrinsic quality either of a researcher or a piece of paper. Again, it's a social construct, but it's not just a social construct because it's tough to measure. If you go to a committee of peers, I mean, many of you have evaluated manuscript or have had your manuscripts evaluated. If referee 1 says that it's amazing, referee 2 says that it's totally bad, and referee 3 is in the middle. Again, researchers don't agree on what quality is. It's true for peer review of papers. It's true for grant evaluation. It's difficult, and it's normal because it's a subjective judgment on something which is a human activity. Fiona, I don't know if you had other questions because
Yes,
we can
you
forever.
can sense my antenna. No, thanks very much. I think you've both actually been bouncing off each other, and it's been sort of fascinating to listen to. And I think it sparked discussions in chat, and people are thinking in different ways from before. We've got some questions here, but I think we actually are. We've got about a quarter of an hour left, 15 minutes or so. And so I guess, are you, either as a result of this conversation or separately, do either of you have any ideas or suggestions as to what can be done to improve things, to make strengthen the link between what people are actually trying to do and what the rewards are, to encourage more diversity of outputs or contributions? Or more, I suppose, like strengthen links between research and responsibility as well, the ethic, perhaps some of the ethics.
Of course, I have a couple of ideas, but I would like to start with just reverting the angle that we started with. So we started with labor and reward, but I think we need to shift from reward that leads to a different type of labor. So I think we don't need to change the labor. The labor is people are doing research. We need to change the reward, which in the end may change how people are going to do research and what topics they will study. So we need first to fix the reward. And how can we do that? Well, of course, reward happens at many levels. It's universities and their tenure and promotion policies. it's research funders in their assessment policies, and it's basically scientific societies that decide, should we give an award to Ricardo or we should give it to Daniel? You know, again, it's those types of things. It's those three organizations that in the end create an environment where researchers decide to do one thing instead of another. And so there's still a lot of work that's being done. Initiatives like DORA are a step in the right direction, but I don't think it's sufficient. We need to deeply change the culture of academic. And the key thing, and I've been repeating that all the time, so those of you who have heard me already, I may be a broken record, but we need to decouple dissemination from reward. We need to stop to see publications as the way we're going to give scientific capital to researchers. We need to go back to disseminating knowledge when we have something to say. As Ricardo was saying, we are now publishing to show that we exist. Hey, I'm not dead yet. Look, I continue to publish. I'm still existing. And we need to publish when, especially in the sciences, when we find something. And I would just like to make a little contrast with someone like Peter Higgs. So you may have heard who Peter Higgs is. Peter Higgs is the, let's say, discoverer of the Higgs boson, which is a particle that he discovered theoretically, but that was actually measured empirically about a decade ago. So Peter Higgs wrote his last paper in 1979 and won the Nobel Prize in 2013, and he's still alive today. So he's been, for more than 40 years, he has not published a single piece. And he was still a professor of physics in Scotland because he says, I have nothing to say anymore. I wrote the discovery I had to make. There's no point in me rewriting that again or doing something else. I still go to seminars. I still read the papers that my colleagues write, and I am up to date. But I have nothing, and I teach the classes to the students, but I have nothing to show anymore. And do we believe that his contribution is not sufficient? I mean, he's won the Nobel Prize. He has discovered a particle that basically solves many things in particle physics. I think that's I would say that this is an above average career, you know, and he has not published for 40 years. So I think we need to go back to an academe where you do research, of course, you stay up to date, but publishing is not the only way you can stay active. It's not the only way that you can stay alive. Of course, there's reasons why we move to the publication, is that there's more competition and all of that, but there's ways in the structure of the system to going back to something that is more sane. I mean, I know many people, I'm sure here, that are like, I wish I could go back to the time I was just reading papers rather than trying to write them. I'm sure there's many people here that have, in the last couple of years, they have written more papers than they have read, you know, which make no sense. So voila, that was my rant. I'm sorry.
No, I really like what you were saying, and I don't want to sound naive, as I was saying before, but it has to do with what you were saying about decouple certain kind of things. And in principle, even if it sounds naive, as I said, I mean, the idea of trust what we do, it looked like simple, but I mean, if you are attaching what you're doing only to the incentive you're going to receive, then you have a problem. So nobody is checking how many papers I'm writing, to be honest. I mean, yes, of course, if you publish, someone is going to say that was great, you were above the average, etc., but it doesn't change anything except for that. And in some ways, bad, because if you don't want to do certain things, you don't do it. But if you really trust in what you are doing and you can make a contribution, I think it makes a difference. I think that to have a confidence that what you are doing, writing a paper, inventing something, creating a new composition, I mean, there are different ways of generating knowledge. So, but if you are too attached to this recompensas, rewarding system, you're producing a problem. It looks like it's an incentive and it's good, but let me give you an example. Yes, let me give you this example. I mean, I have been applying to different grants to different agencies because I was trying to work in certain kind of projects related to art and science together. Yes, focusing, not now that is everyone is talking about climate change. But I started to work on this many years ago, about 12 years ago. I mean, I was already working on these issues. So I was applying to a certain agency and they were telling me, no, this is too scientific. It's not artistic enough. Okay, exactly the same. I was applying to the other one, and as you can imagine, was the opposite answer. No, this is too artistic. It's not scientific. Result, I never get the money. So the way it is done, the assessment. So what I did was I started to do it in a more close to maybe to what MoreBrains is doing. It says we have taken the cooperative approach, and you are saying what cooperative is. So I'm organizing a full conference that has been in Australia, Colombia, I don't know, 8 countries already. So we go with what is possible in each place. So if they can get money, we do more. If we cannot get money, we do less. But we don't wait for the money to push the things because, and this is very important, coming from the extreme south and going to the extreme north, what you see is that in certain places, first you have the idea and you try to push it, whatever you have the money or not. In other places, I feel that first get the money and then we'll see what we do. I'm exaggerating, you know, but in some ways, we need to get the money. We need to get the money and then okay, let's put enough words so we can get the money. And then we'll twist it and we'll surf in a way that we'll do what we want to do. It's a little complex world where we live.
No, thank you very much for recognizing. Yes, we were trying to do a cooperative approach with our group.
I made my research, Fiona.
Yes,
I made my
absolutely.
Research, you see?
So, I mean, it sounds as though, although there's, if you like, a lot that's flawed in the system, which can probably only be properly addressed and corrected at like the regional or national or institutional level, there is still, there are things that the individual or the research group can also do. You can nudge, you can push what you're already doing and think more widely about how you can increase the range and inclusivity and diversity of your contributions, which actually is quite cheering. The idea, if you like, that we've all got some of our own agency in this. But I mean, do you think that there's also a tension or a problem in competitive behaviours, if you like, that there's a certain level of people want to get the reward, so they will act competitively to be rewarded, and so it essentially you can't breed that out of researchers because that is just the way that they want to be.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting because I mean, one could say that there's a kind of a right-wing approach to and left-wing approach. I mean, I think it's an oversimplification, but of course, if you think that people are better when they compete, that's a certain worldview. If you think that people are better when they cooperate, that's also a different worldview. And I just want to emphasize one thing, and I know we're running out of time, but it's all countries fund researchers. And there's a very interesting and I think important distinction between the US and Canada on that aspect. So in the United States, success rates are very low and people are getting crazy high amounts. So success rates are like less than 10%, but you get a lot of money. In many research councils in Canada, and especially for NSERC, which is the equivalent of the National Science Foundation, the success rates are basically 75%, which means that the science policy is to give money to everyone, because you understand that the goal here is not individual rewards, but collective rewards. Why do we fund my research? It's not so that I win the Nobel Prize for me. No, society gives me money so that I can contribute positively. I can train students. I can find stuff which is going to have social impact. And the idea behind this science policy that we have here is that the more people are doing research, the more there's going to be collective benefits to this public funding for research. In the United States, I would say that they probably have the same goal, But the ideology is that we need to fund only the best, because only the best can change society, which of course leads to all kinds of inequalities, because you overfund Harvard and you underfund all of the historically Black colleges and all of those things. And of course, who goes to Harvard? Well, it is not the most diverse crowd, basically. So yes, there is stuff that can be done there. And of course, it always takes time to change the world, but I must say that I really appreciate this opportunity to try to at least talk about changing the world.
Yes, yes. So, and I find that, well, yes, maybe it's an oversimplification, but I think it's interesting view, Vincent, what you were saying about the right wing and the left wing. I think it's very interesting to see it that way. And this reminds me, we have only a few minutes about to end, but this reminds me about a colleague. He's an astrophysicist directing a very well-known publication in MIT Press about art, science, and technology. And he used to say, well, if there is no more time for people, just the individual genius, to discover something, a lot of people is working collectively today. So the way we do science, even art, many times, I mean, there's not one way of doing things, that's for sure. But I mean, the way in general is changing a lot. And what he's focusing a lot is also in yes, not only being cooperative and the work of collective between communities, but this approach that is opening another door, a big door, that is transdisciplinarity. So he used to say, if we couldn't fix these specific problems in science with the traditional approach, why we don't try something different? So, like, for example, climate change, I mean, who is going to fix it? People from the economic side, or the politicians, or the scientists, or who is going to fix it? Well, probably there is not like one genius that is going to solve the problem. Probably someone is going to find a very interesting solution for certain aspects of it, but the whole problem is too big. So we need really to run with many different perspectives to do something. I'm saying climate change because I'm working on that a lot. But I mean, we can take like poverty or like many other things that are very complex, where transdisciplinarity is a different way of doing things. Maybe it's an utopian way, yes, because it's very difficult. It's much more easy to talk about than to really do that things in that sense. But I still believe that we can do things in a different way. In fact, I was afraid before starting this, okay, you are an expert on this aspect and I'm outsider, so this is going to be a disaster, and we could keep talking about this and we could go for a coffee next time. Yes. Absolutely. So, and talk much more about this. So just that, I think that transdisciplinarity is really more than a buzzword. That is a way of thinking, a way of approaching things, and a way of trying to do things for the future.
Totally agree.
Okay, no, thank you both. I'm realizing we're down to about the final minute or so. Do you want to have like a closing remark, or is there a take home that we should all think about as we, go about the rest of our day?
I only want to say thank you so much. I want to thank Jimena and you, Fiona, and Vincent. This has been very interesting. I'm very happy to be participating. I'm sorry we didn't have too much time to check the chat, because I'm seeing things running in the chat and we didn't have
save
time
the chat and write something.
Save the chat and yes, okay. So thank you so much.
No, thank you, both very much, and thank you to the audience who have been also really engaged and interested throughout. So, I mean, certainly I take from it that I think there was a lot of talk in the chat about the effect of COVID, as well as in the room itself. And it seems that if we hadn't had COVID, I'm not sure we'd have had this conference and then this conversation. So I suppose it's a case of there continue to be many challenges, but hopefully there are new opportunities that human ingenuity can take hold of and improve our futures with. So thinking about that, then, thank you, as I say, everybody, for participating and making this such an interesting session. I understand that this is the final event for today for this particular meeting, but it will then start up again tomorrow. There is another day of sessions, which will be on the same Zoom link. So I hope to see many of you there tomorrow as well. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ricardo, Fiona, Vincent. Gracias. Gracias a todos y todas por estar en la sesión. Y sí, recuerden que estamos transmitiendo por YouTube, que recién preguntaban por la grabación, así que va a estar todo disponible. Tienen toda la información en nuestro sitio openandinclusiveresearch.org. Muchísimas gracias.
Bueno.
Sí, Ricardo.
No, sorry. No, it would be good to see the chat because there were so many things. I don't know what was happening exactly. I didn't have
We're
time
going to save
check.
the chat. Sí, vamos,
Okay.
salvamos el chat y lo compartimos porque tiene un montón de cosas súper interesantes y ricas. Han dejado unos comentarios geniales.
Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you so much. Was great, Vincent. Very, very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you to you all. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Ricardo. Bye, bye. Nos vemos mañana. Mañana tenemos sesión con la gente de Claxo desde la mañana, luego tendremos a la gente de Force 11 y del proyecto Repo de Educación Abierta, y cerramos con una conversación entre Ivonne Lujano y Juan Pablo Alperín, así que los esperamos para seguir hablando de ciencia abierta, acceso abierto y más temas. Gracias, hasta mañana.
Chao. Thank you so much. Chao, Jimena, gracias.
Bye.
Bye, Fiona, thank you.